As you hopefully saw in the introduction, someone once said, "The Bible is more to blame for the unhealthy views of sexuality than pornography." I naturally challenged that by asking them to do the research, and they provided a list of biblical passages that apparently does just that. So let's see exactly what they are on about. Check out these passages and compare them to my studies to see if there's any way these can be explained, or if indeed they are giving a more devastating view of sexuality, inspiring more heinous acts than pornography. Now, before you say, "Oh, look at him all high and mighty," I've struggled with pornography addiction for years. I know the ins and outs, and I know how it can be viewed. It's worthwhile bearing in mind that whilst I have a healthy sexual relationship with my partner, that does not necessarily mean that I'm giving her anything that will cause her any harm. I respect her as my partner. If you have anything else to say about that, look at yourselves. It's also worthwhile noting that this can fall into the classic trap of what is seen doesn't need to be emulated. This will naturally lead into the argument of, do video games promote violence? Do certain films promote violence in children? And the amount of influence certain medias have on children. I've seen many people say that the Bible promotes violence, and I've responded, well, so do the Muppets, along with piracy, being miserly, and cruelty to animals. Just watch any of the Muppet films. Muppet Christmas Carol, Muppets Around. Look it up, you'll see that the Muppets just show those things. And it'll be a matter of debate whether it works, whether it is influence, or whether it's just depiction. This is something we can cover in a later video if needs be, but for now we are assuming both have equal power to promote unhealthy sexual habits. Please note I'm also referring to a thesis that is in the works, and I would like some extra input on, referencing back to several videos I've done in the past, links to which will be in the description. With all that said, let's get on with it. He starts off with a double, raping a virgin and paying a fair price, in Deuteronomy 22 verse 28-29. The verse is a debated topic because there is no term that translates consistently to rape in the Hebrew Bible. Various terms get translated to violate, defile, ravish, and sometimes incest, lie with. This makes it tricky to confirm the translation as such, but given the context which later says defile or violate, this implies not only a forced copulation, but also one which potentially gave the woman an STD. This explains the need to marry him ASAP, since it contains the disease and prevents it from spreading amongst the population. Claiming 50 shekels is a fair price is misunderstanding not only the price, which can either be taken as a unit of currency or weight, potentially the equivalent of nearly $1,000 US, but also the fact the man has to keep the wife and all that pertains to it. Generally speaking, people who rape just want the fun of the act, not the responsibility of it all. Also, if we look at the cross-reference, Exodus 22 verse 16-17 gives a similar accounting, whilst also stating that the father can refuse to let the marriage happen while still demanding the price. Being concerned with the woman is perfectly reasonable, but the man isn't getting away scot-free and can't get out of the situation if caught. Add that to a later passage mentioning a form of late contraception, and the woman has more support than otherwise expected, realistically. Next is about marrying and raping a slave, in Genesis chapter 30 verse 9. This is referring to Jacob and Leah giving her manservant to him to make more children. This, however, is a classic case of describe, not prescribe. This wasn't a commandment by God, but in fact a coercion by Leah to keep Jacob as hers. This is not a good place to start, since really you're simply claiming one thing is another, when more than likely, even in debate, it's not. Force a prisoner to marry you. Deuteronomy 21 verse 11 to 13. This is how to deal with prisoners, apparently. Understanding the context matters, since a month of mourning can be time for her to become comfortable as well, and could potentially lead to a relationship. However, verse 14, which is deliberately omitted, states that if she doesn't please the man, or the relationship doesn't work out, he must free her and not sell her as a slave. This is much more protective to the woman than many will allow for. Marrying a same-sex partner. 1 Samuel 18 verse 1 to 4. This is about David and Samuel loving each other. Is he homophobic or something? I never knew he was anti-same-sex marriage. I'm not sure if he's read any of these, which isn't expected really. Furthermore, they didn't actually marry, but that didn't stop their affection for each other. Whether it was platonic, brothers in arms, or homosexual in nature is unclear, and no more suggestive than John the Apostle laying against Jesus at the Last Supper. Whilst I interpret that as John being close to Jesus, others said it was a cultural thing, which I'm willing to accept. Depending on one's interpretation of it, it could be seen as many things, but same-sex marriage is definitely not one of them. This is confusing to say the least. Lots of wives? Judges chapter 8 verse 30. This is another describe not prescribe, since this prompted what could be called a kinslaying by the eldest son. This doesn't exactly give a good prospect to this, or it being very stable. You took another wife but disliked her. Deuteronomy 22 verse 13. Cherry picking and ignoring the rest of the section, which gives much more detail. Also, where does the other wife come into this? This is when you say your wife isn't a virgin and call her a slut to the rest of the community. The people argue over the evidence, saying it's checking the hymen, but references to cloth and linen, the bedsheet or a garment being used as evidence implies it's not an intrusive check, but examination of the linens that can contain stains, as linen is prone to do. This, if anything, puts the favour on the woman more than the man. So even with the reference to verse 21, where she does get stoned to death for being a slut to stop the spread of STDs, the man has more to worry about than the woman here, having to pay twice the bride price and losing any right to divorce her. His clear attempts to get rid of her could backfire quite drastically. Command your wife to be silent. 1 Timothy chapter 2 verse 12. This is a controversial passage and is in fact contrary to some of the teachings of Paul himself, where he allows women to correct preachers. But then again, that's in private, not in public. Many factors, including the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus being a prominent opposition to the growing Christian church, and the use of I do not allow in reference to women teaching, implies it's very much tailored to the region, like how one is discouraging loud children in church, but most of them would be teenagers. I've done a video on women in the Bible already, and have a follow-up one coming next year. I want to make that on International Women's Day, so go check those out when you can. Remind your wife to submit to your authority. Colossians 3 verse 18. Interestingly, they choose to ignore the following verse that tells the husband not to be harsh to their wives. This is, again, cherry picking. Not good. An infertile wife would be better off dead. Genesis chapter 30, verse 1. This is not in the Bible, and is merely a desperate cry by Rachel, showing that marriage isn't perfect, even in the Bible, especially since Jacob wasn't exactly making things better with his reply. This is a gross negative way of looking at it. This is literally a cry for help by someone despairing, and is being taken as biblical law. No. Be sensible, people. Force your widowed sister-in-law to marry you. Deuteronomy 25, verse 5. This would make sense in the cases where the families were living together, but the passage actually seems to put more pressure on the man than the woman, since if he refuses, he gets the punishment. So, if this meant to be indication of the misogyny of the Bible, it's going the wrong way. Cut off your wife's hand for touching another man. Deuteronomy 25, verse 11. Considering that tactic is looked down on as in all official contact sports, and even called underhanded in a playground fight, this isn't surprising. It's not an accidental move. Particularly if you bear in mind that they'll be wearing tunics which actively cover the area they'll have to reach for. It has to be a deliberate up and under action, so there's no chance of it being a chance. When considering that those whose testicles are damaged are forbidden from entering the temple, this is essentially banishment without trial. Add that to Jesus saying, if your right hand should cause you to sin, cut it off. This is merely a continuation of that. Basically, leave the plums alone. Sell your daughter to pay your debts. Exodus 21, verse 7 to 11. There's nothing in this passage that suggests a debt being paid. It's actually putting many protections on the daughter, so she isn't harmed in any way. This is just looking like copy and paste rubbish. Execute your first son. Exodus 22, verse 29. Nothing that mentions executing. The one could imply sacrifice, but not in the blood way. Giving to the temple as a servant or priest is more likely. Punish uncircumcised boys. Genesis 17, verse 10 to 14. This is simply, if you do not circumcise, if you do not want to get circumcised, which is completely reasonable medical practice today, you can leave. If you don't want to be part of our club, that is your choice. Sounds like they want people to be forced into this, but I'm pretty sure if there was a line that says you must be circumcised against your will, they would still be claiming it was sexual exploitation or something like that. But this isn't a coherent set of arguments anymore. I was honestly hoping this would be a good set of arguments, but just looking at the list, which isn't formatted well, so it was hard to read and decipher, after a while it stopped referring to anything pornographic and just goes into other dark passages of the Bible. I may get to those one day, but this is getting ridiculous. The only vaguely pornographic passage that has to do with killing gays, which is later on, and their words, I might say, I've already explained in countless videos was a method of containing STDs, to which the answer today should ideally be either sexual education or same-sex marriage. Check out those videos if you want to see the full arguments. This is not research on their part, but flat out blatant copy and pasting the first thing that they see that looks like it supports their position without verifying it. Even some of the things mentioned multiple times. This happens a lot and doesn't make any of the atheists arguing this case look rational at all. In comparison, pornography shows incest, refusing to listen to people saying no, perverted behaviour towards women of all ages, invasion of privacy, statutory rape, which is initiating intercourse without consent, coercive behaviour, sexual favours, prostitution and infidelity. All of this before we get to anything related to the violence of some sexual acts depicted in many videos. Many people often point out that, I think it was a rabbi, I don't remember his name, was recently put in charge of many pornography sites. The head of ethics, and that was to reduce revenge porn and also reduce the amount of violence in those videos. So it's not so much an endorsement by the church, but more a containment of the violent porn that gets promoted, and potentially even promoting the dangerous acts. There's also a physical aspect, where consuming internet pornography can result in body expectations that are unrealistic, and sexual impudence. If we are to take this as showing, meaning promoting, this encourages many young, hormone-driven minds to think that these acts are what people do during intercourse. This can lead to misunderstandings of signals, sexual harassment charges, and rape. This isn't something that is hypothetical. There are genuine people, just look on Reddit, there are genuine people who say this happens. And there are people that will stand by it and say, this is what women want. But really their partners say, no, you've just been watching too much of the hub. This is far worse than anything the Bible says, even when you refuse to do your research properly. I'm not going to lie, this was a massive disappointment. I asked for research, they just copied and pasted from a website, and didn't even consider formatting it coherently before hitting send. The irony is another person tried to goad me into a debate on the subject. I don't always bother in this case, especially if I can kill two birds with one stone and make a video of it, which I will share definitely with that person. However, this chap, when I offered him a related topic where video games promote violence, which is not too far from the core of the topic of the discussion, he just avoided it while saying I was doing the same. Was I avoiding it? I suppose in a way, but that's because I was already doing my research and I find videos much easier to work with than simply copying and pasting all of my work onto a Facebook post. It's completely pointless. Most of these people don't want reasonable debates. They just want fights, and I'm not above using personal attacks to get them going. Don't fall for these people. Be rational and do your research, for heaven's sake. There's more lists like this one on the forums, which I may get to when I have time. I've been rather busy, as you're probably aware. But hopefully this will show you that just because someone puts up a block of text without even bothering to make it legible, this doesn't mean their position is superior. Often, if you look through the text, you just see they have nothing to offer but the classic arguments copied from a website. Not their own original debates, but simply what other people say, and have often been debunked. Take them seriously if you can, and go through their research. It's difficult at times, but even a mountain biker has to get to the top of the hill before he can ride it down. So keep searching. Stay humble, stay safe, and God be with you, my friend.